I would like to call this hearing to order this morning. The topic of our hearing this morning is it's a legislative hearing on the Energy Tax Prevention Act of 2011. I certainly want to welcome the members of the subcommittee. I look forward to working with all of you as we seek to craft an energy and environmental strategy and policy that will be in the best interest of the American people. And I believe that can best be accomplished by Congress and the EPA working together. Congress intends to reassert itself in the statutory and regulatory process at EPA. I'm pleased to be serving again with my friend and colleague, the ranking member, Mr. Rush. We served on the CTCP subcommittee in the last Congress, and I look forward to working with him as well as all members of this subcommittee. I also want to thank our witnesses today and thank them for being here to help us look at this very important issue. We're going to have 4 panels of witnesses today, and all of them are going to provide us with information that's going to be helpful as we move forward. Today's hearing is going to focus on greenhouse gas rulemaking within the Environmental Protection Agency that many of us believe attempts to address an issue properly within the purview of the Congress. And then we're also going to be talking about legislation that has been introduced that would restore the proper balance to decision-making affecting greenhouse gases. The Obama administration has been the most aggressive in recent memory. As a matter of fact, 6 rules were issued on Christmas Eve, and there's a pipeline full of regulations waiting to be issued. And states frequently are not being given adequate time to re-examine and rewrite state implementation plans to respond to this aggressive pace. I, like others, have been besieged with calls from entities all over the country complaining about EPA's attempt to regulate greenhouse gases. Congress has made its will crystal clear on this issue. Our esteemed colleague, Chairman Emeritus John Dingell on the Democratic side, who led the negotiations on the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments, wrote, "I would have difficulty concluding that the House-Senate conferees who rejected the Senate greenhouse gas regulatory provisions contemplated regulating greenhouse gas emissions or addressing global warming under the Clean Air Act. As recently as 2008, Mr. Dingell warned that regulating greenhouse gases under the Clean Air Act rather than new legislation would lead to a, as he said, glorious mess." And then on July 25, 1997, Senate Resolution 98, expressing the sense of the Senate that the United States not be a signatory to the Kyoto Protocol that would have required the U.S. to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, was approved by the Senate by a vote of 95-0. And when the 111th Congress revisited this issue last year, it responded with a resounding no to regulating greenhouse gases by not passing the so-called cap-and-trade bill. Although Congress has made its position abundantly clear not to regulate greenhouse gases, we now have a bureaucracy, unelected staff at EPA and the courts pushing the United States down a path that, in my opinion, will cost jobs and make us less competitive in the global marketplace. Furthermore, what's worse about this is the technology is not available to capture greenhouse gases, and we do not have any idea what the cost versus the benefits will be. And if the tailoring rule is determined to be a violation of the Clean Air Act, which is certainly possible, EPA, applying the statutes permitting these thresholds, has estimated that over 6 million sources in our country would need to obtain Title V operating permits, and also that would lead to 82,000 permitting actions annually under the Preventing Significant Deterioration formula. And it's also been estimated at EPA that doing that would estimate a cost of $22.5 billion it would cost permitting authorities in the U.S. So good energy policy is about expanding choices. All of us know that our energy demands are going to basically double by the year 2035. And we're going to need energy from all sources to meet the demands of this country. We're going to need renewables, we're going to need natural gas, coal, nuclear, everything. And I do get the sense that sometimes those people who are pushing this country down a quick pathway to green energy are more interested in putting fossil fuels out of business than they are working to solve this problem. We recognize that we have to have energy from all sources. So I'm delighted that you are here today. We look forward to the testimony of all of you. And at this time, I would like to recognize the gentleman from Illinois, the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Rush, for 5 minutes for his opening statement. Ms. Jackson, thank you very much for taking time to join us today. We are looking forward to your testimony and the opportunity to ask questions. And with that, I'm going to go on and recognize you for an opening statement. I will say that Senator Inhofe ended up taking almost 7 minutes in his opening statement, so we'd be happy to give you 7 minutes in your opening statement. So you're recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try not to take all 7. To you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify about Chairman Upton's draft bill to eliminate portions of the Clean Air Act, the landmark law that all American children and adults rely on to protect them from harmful air pollution. The bill appears to be a part of a broader effort in this Congress to delay, weaken, or eliminate Clean Air Act protections of the American public. I respectfully ask the members of this committee to keep in mind that EPA's implementation of the Clean Air Act saves millions of American children and adults from the debilitating and expensive illnesses that occur when smokestacks and tailpipes release unrestricted amounts of harmful pollution into the air we breathe. Last year alone, EPA's implementation of the Clean Air Act saved more than 160,000 American lives, avoided more than 100,000 hospital visits, prevented millions of cases of respiratory illness, including bronchitis and asthma, enhanced American productivity by preventing millions of lost workdays, and kept American kids healthy and in school. EPA's implementation of the Act also has contributed to dynamic growth in the U.S. environmental technologies industry and its workforce. In 2008, that industry generated nearly $300 billion in revenues and $44 billion in exports. Yesterday, the University of Massachusetts and Ceres released an analysis finding that 2 of the updated Clean Air Act standards EPA is preparing to establish for mercury, soot, smog, and other harmful air pollutants from power plants will create nearly 1.5 million jobs over the next 5 years. As you know, Mr. Chairman, the Supreme Court concluded in 2007 that the Clean Air Act's definition of air pollutant includes greenhouse gas emissions. The Court rejected the EPA Administrator's refusal to determine whether that pollution endangers Americans' health and welfare. Based on the best peer-reviewed science, EPA found in 2009 that man-made greenhouse gas emissions do threaten the health and welfare of the American people. EPA is not alone in reaching that conclusion. The National Academy of Sciences has stated that there is a strong, credible body of evidence based on multiple lines of research documenting that the climate is changing and that the changes are caused in large part by human activities. 18 of America's leading scientific societies have written that multiple lines of evidence show humans are changing the climate, that contrary assertions are inconsistent with an objective assessment of the vast body of peer-reviewed science, and that ongoing climate change will have broad impacts on society, including the global economy and the environment. Chairman Upton's bill would, in its own words, repeal that scientific finding. Politicians overruling scientists on a scientific question, that would become part of this committee's legacy. Last April, EPA and the Department of Transportation completed harmonized standards under the Clean Air Act and the Energy Independence and Security Act to decrease the oil consumption and greenhouse gas emissions of model year 2012 through 2016 cars and light trucks sold in the U.S. Chairman Upton's bill would block President Obama's plan to follow up with Clean Air Act standards for cars and light trucks of model years 2017 through 2025. Removing the Clean Air Act from the equation would forfeit pollution reductions and oil savings on a massive scale, increasing America's debilitating oil dependence. EPA and many of its state partners have now begun implementing safeguards under the Clean Air Act to address carbon pollution from the largest facilities when they are built or expanded. A collection of 11 electric power companies called EPA's action a reasonable approach focusing on improving the energy efficiency of new power plants and large industrial facilities. And EPA has announced a schedule to establish uniform Clean Air Act performance standards for limiting carbon pollution at America's power plants and oil refineries. Those standards will be developed with extensive stakeholder input, including from industry. They will reflect careful consideration of costs and will incorporate compliance flexibility. Chairman Upton's bill would block that reasonable approach. The Small Business Majority and the Main Street Alliance have pointed out that such blocking action would have negative implications for many businesses, large and small, that have enacted new practices to reduce their carbon footprint as part of their business models. They also write that it would hamper the growth of the clean energy sector of the U.S. economy, a sector that a majority of small business owners view as essential to their ability to compete. Chairman Upton's bill would have additional negative impacts that its drafters might not have intended. For example, it would prohibit EPA from taking further actions to implement the Renewable Fuels Program, which promotes the domestic production of advanced biofuels. I hope this information has been helpful to the committee, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Ms. Jackson, thank you very much. Before you came in, I had mentioned in my opening statement that Congress had specifically looked at regulating greenhouse gases on 3 different occasions. One in 1990 when the last Clean Air Act amendments were adopted. They rejected it then. Number 2, 1998, when the Senate voted 95-0 not to take up the Kyoto Protocol, objecting to the greenhouse gas regulations in the Kyoto Protocol. And then last year, when the U.S. Congress refused to adopt the cap-and-trade bill. So Congress, on 3 separate occasions, has spoken very clearly that, in its opinion, we do not need to regulate greenhouse gases. So I would ask you the question, just your personal opinion. Do you object to Congress having an up or down vote approving or disallowing EPA's greenhouse gas regulations?
Sir, I am here to explain the impact of our greenhouse gas regulations, and then Congress is obviously going to make a determination whether
you
to vote
wouldn't
on any
object to
legislation.
Congress having an up or down vote on your regulations then, correct?
Sir, I would not presume to tell Congress its business.
Thank you. Now, I want to ask you, did your agency conduct an overall comprehensive assessment of the cost of the greenhouse gas regulations?
We conduct assessments of costs of regulations. We did not conduct an assessment of the cost of the endangerment finding because it is a scientific finding.
But do you have any idea what the cost of the greenhouse gas regulations would be? As
we propose regulations, for example, the CARS rule that I mentioned in my opening statement, we do a regulatory impact analysis that's required.
Now, by the way, on the car thing, it's my understanding that that costs $52 billion. Is that correct?
The cost of the cars and trucks rule, I don't have the exact number in front of me, but
well, my understanding, the light duty vehicle rule, according to the information I have, costs $52 billion and will increase in 2016 the cost of one of those vehicles by $948. Now, we recognize cost goes along with regulations, but it's also the information that we have that by the year 2100, the greenhouse gas standards for the light-duty motor vehicle is expected to reduce global temperatures by 0.006 degrees centigrade, $52 billion. And that's about mobile sources. And I don't think anyone has any idea what the regulation of stationary sources would be. Would you give us a guess on what the cost would be on that?
Mr. Chairman, just 2 points. The auto rules that you speak about were hailed by the industry, consumers, and environmentalists because of cost savings. You see, they're efficiency rules for automobiles and trucks, and so they pay for themselves, and as the price of gas increases, they pay for themselves in shorter and shorter periods. I believe at the time the estimate was somewhere between 3 and 4 years. So the amount you save on gasoline.
You know, another understanding that I have is that there really is no technology available to really reduce greenhouse gases other than efficiencies. Would you agree with that?
There are emerging technologies for stationary sources, but energy efficiency is thought to be the low-hanging fruit in terms of dealing.
Yeah, and that's my understanding that we're getting ready to implement this tremendous greenhouse gas regulation. It's going to, in fact, your air chief indicated that if your tailoring rule is determined to be illegal, that EPA is going to require 6 million sources to obtain Title V operating permits and would have to have 82,000 permitting actions under the PSD program, resulting in an estimated $22.5 billion just for the permitting authorities.
It sounds like you agree with me that the tailoring rule is a good idea to protect small business and sources from unneeded regulation.
Doesn't it explicitly violate the language of the Clean Air Act, which says specifically if it's 100 or 250 tons per year emitting, that it must be regulated?
No, sir, I don't see it as a violation. I see it as
But that's what the
looking
language says, doesn't it?
Yeah, the legal theory
And your
is to
tailoring
prevent absurd results.
Your
I
tailoring
believe it
rule
would
says
be-
what, 25,000 tons, or is it 75,000 tons?
It's 100,000 tons, the
100.
equivalent of a railroad car,
Now, tell me about
coal
this.
burned a
Tell me about this. Well, my time's expired.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. I recognize at this time Mr. Rush.